like 3/4 of the page on 15a, and we're up to the second Mishnah on page 15a. One of the things that you see in the Gemara is sometimes you could have a Mishnah that the Gemara elaborates on for pages and pages, and sometimes you have a Mishnah that the Gemara elaborates on and finds it, understandable. And we move right on to the next Mishnah. And here you have that on page 15a. You have a Mishnah on the top of the page, and then it talks about the Mishnah for about 30 lines. And then it jumps to the new Mishnah on page 15a on the bottom. And basically, the Mishnah was understood. We've explained it. Now, I won't say that Gemara was the easiest Gemara. Of course, it's a topic of much discussion in the commentaries. As we concluded on Friday, it definitely is a very interesting Gemara, this earlier Gemara, where it talked about a way of being mevatel, to nullifying a tikra, a roof, that it somehow gave us an avenue to, it's called bitule tikra. It's being mevatel, nullifying a roof, that even though something might be invalid for schach, but there's a way of koshering it, making it kosher for schach. And it was the way we learned it, which is Rashi's pshat, came out that it was quite an innovation, quite a chidush, something surprising, quite surprising that it's permissible, because we had learned earlier that boards that are 4 handbreadths wide are invalid for schach according to everyone. The way Shmuel understood the Mishnah, everyone holds that it's invalid, and yet the Gemara says, well, if you do this and that to it, you can actually use them for schach. They're invalid schach, but there's a way of doing it. The way Rashi understands it is because you've shown that you understand that there's a big difference between a house and the roof of a house versus a sukkah and the roof of a sukkah, and that a sukkah is meant for shade and a house is not kosher because it's meant for dwelling. And that type of schach, that type of roof that's on a house, you've shown that is invalid for a sukkah, and you would need to remove it. And the fact that you removed it and put it back on, that is a way that you will now get a permit to use these boards for schach, because you removed them. They were initially on your house, you removed them, and you're now allowed to use them for schach. So again, this is the way Rashi learned the previous Gemara. I'm just going over a little. I just wanted to give you a little review of Friday's what we learned on Friday, and this is how we concluded that the Gemara, that even though these boards are really invalid for schach, but there is a way to use them for schach if you show that if you show that that these would not be kosher if you use them for a house, and you wouldn't be able to use that for schach. And since you've shown that, then you're going to be able to use them now for schach. Yes, Victor.
So, Rabbi, this is, like you said, a very unusual circuit. It's almost like we didn't kosher the sukkah, we koshered the person. Like the person became, he got an exemption because
Right.
it was what he did, because of what he did, not because of what happened to the sukkah. The person himself became a different person almost. It's an interesting
Well,
concept.
the only thing is that you can't take what you're saying too far. What do I mean? That what happens if this guy wants to build another sukkah? Will he be then allowed to use regular boards? No. So we don't really kosher the person, because if we koshered the person, and we said, for you, you're allowed to, then we should let him build another sukkah as well and say the sukkah is kosher, right? So it
Right.
is sort
Yeah,
of
yeah, yeah.
koshering, it is really just koshering this sukkah, and not really koshering the person, uh, you know. But yeah, definitely unusual. This is definitely surprising, that this is okay. And because of that, there are other commentaries that learn a different pshat in this Gemara because they can't accept the way Rashi is learning it. And the other commentaries want to say that we must be talking about a case where the boards are not wide for hand breaths. We must be talking about that they're smaller boards. And the Gemara's discussion is that there might be a an issue that we never spoke about before, really, and that is that when you have a house that is made up with a roof that has boards, so the boards, even if the boards are smaller than 4 hand breaths, and there's a roof on this house or on this porch, there's two problems to this roof. One of them is the obvious problem that it's a roof of a house. It's you're trying to use a roof of a house, or a roof of a porch, or you're using this roof that was already built as a house or built as a porch, and it's called tasev leimin ha'asu. You can't now use it for a sukkah by just saying I'm using it for a sukkah, and you have to like rebuild it kosher in a kosher way. But in addition to that, there's another problem that our Gemara, according to this way of the Rishonim, these commentaries want to learn, that what our Mishnah and Gemara is really telling us is that when you built it this way, even smaller boards are going to be a problem because it's so similar to a roof, because you built it as a roof, that you're going to make a mistake and think that you can use any roof. If we allow you even these smaller boards, there's another gezeiras tikra. In other words, what the way the commentaries want to say is that there's an additional problem here, that your roof is going to cause people to make mistakes, even though they're smaller than 4 hand breaths. And they want to explain the Gemara that way. It's a little confusing. If you go through the Gemara, there are some issues that have to be worked out in order to learn the Gemara this way. But I'm just mentioning it because the way Rashi learns is so surprising. Therefore, they want to learn that it's talking about smaller boards. And and if you learn it that it's smaller boards, then it's not as surprising that you're going to be able to be mevatel them, that you're able in the end of the Gemara. Basically, what I'm sharing with you is that if you learn that we're dealing with smaller width boards, then it's not so surprising that you're going to be there. We're going to permit them because they never were really invalid. They were only invalid because they were made into a house. If you take them off from being the house, it's not a problem. But the you could be mevatel them. There's a way of nullifying them, and that's basically, in other words, the whole issue was only a rabbinic issue in the first place. So if you take them off, you can possibly nullify them according to Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rameir. The only way of nullifying them is if you remove every other one. But basically, that's the other way of learning our Gemara. I will also mention one other thing. Yes, you have a question?
Jeffrey.
Got it.
Jeff, you want to ask something?
Yes. It maybe afterwards we could talk also about what was on Amud Daled, where we also were batel with das about the materials we're using for the itztaba in the sukkah. We had
Uh-huh.
Dav Daled.
Yeah.
So we had to change the usage of the materials so that we could build the platform.
Right. And over there, we spoke about nullifying materials, what materials could be nullified and what can't. And you're connecting it to this Gemara because what is the connection? What are you, how are you comparing it? What do you mean to say?
Because he's doing it for his own sukkah. It's not for everybody. And he is able to do it with das.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that he changed, he didn't shorten the boards or something like that. So it wasn't part of a house in this case, but it was something that was usually used for another purpose. So
Right.
Since the language is very similar, and it says that he's bottled in his own das,
Mm-hmm.
that seemed to be coming closer to what Victor was referring to.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, Jeffrey. I'm not sure if I can agree with it. There's really a difference. I'll tell you why. On Daf Daled, on page 4, we spoke about nullifying something. So it becomes nullified in a sense that this is no longer a separate entity. This is part of the floor. And so being that you're the one who's doing that, you have the ability to, depending on what the material is and depending on what the common understanding of your actions and so you do have the ability to nullify something and make it part of the ground. Here, what we're really saying is, do we remove the rabbinic decree? In other words, you've proven that you don't need a rabbinic decree. It's not that the purpose of these items they're now not significant. Here, what we're saying is, yeah, I mean, this is a tikra, but the decree doesn't need to be. We don't need a decree on you. We're not gonna extend the decree in this scenario. We're gonna remove the decree. You're right. It is based on your proof that you've shown. It's based on your actions or your actions have proven that you don't need a decree anymore. But it's not that concept of bittul where you've nullified something and that's caused it to be permissible. It's caused it to be part of the ground. You know what I'm saying? You're right. It's your das that's doing it, but the fact is, it's more of it's going through a different avenue. It's a different.
What's
mechanism.
a tikra? What's a tikra?
A roof. That it's similar to a roof and so on. So anyway, this is it's interesting. It's an interesting point, Jeffrey. That of course you're able to remove this rabbinic decree. Definitely an interesting concept, unusual concept. There should be a rabbinic decree here, and I'll tell you why I think it's even more surprising, is because we had a previous Gemara where the Gemara wanted to say that even if you take boards and you put them on their side,
yes,
the boards are like metal boards, right? We had, at least according to some opinions, which seem to be the final halacha, even though that you put them on the side, so they're not for hand breaths anymore because you put it on its side. They are an entity of impure schach, and yet the Gemara here says, well, you know what? It's not really an entity of unkosher schach, because you've now proven that the decree doesn't apply to you. So anyway, there is a similarity, Jeffrey, but it's using a different mechanism of why it's permissible.
Well, there's things to think about in the future.
Okay, yeah. Now, anyway, the bottom line is, I do want to just mention one last point, and then we'll go on to the new Mishnah. And the last point that I'll mention is that we spoke on Friday that the Ritva learns that The issue here is not about you proving that you know that you cannot dwell in a house that has logs on it as a roof, and it's built as a house, and you've proven that that's not going to be valid because you took them off and put them back on. So you've proven yourself that it's okay. That's the way Rashi learned. The Ritva learns that the issue of having these boards as your roof of a house is that other people are going to think that you can, it's about what other people are going to think, not about you. And the conclusion of the Gemara here, the way Rashi learns, is following his logic. In other words, Rashi is going to, according to his view, that the whole issue was about you yourself, not about other people. So therefore, Rashi can learn the way he learns, that when you prove that you know the difference and that you take off the roof and put it back on without nailing it. So in other words, you've proven that you know that there's an issue of using a roof because you've taken it off and put it back down. That's the way Rashi learns. And because his issue in the first place was that we're afraid you will make a mistake and think that you could use a regular house. So therefore, Rashi can learn that when you show that you're not going to make that mistake, then we're going to allow you to have it. The Ritva, who's learning that the whole issue is what other people are going to think, he can't learn this way, not only because logically it's surprising, but also because his whole issue is what other people are going to think. And when you take off your roof and put it back down, they're not going to know the difference. Is it nailed? It's not nailed. Is there any tar on top? There isn't any tar on top. They're not going to know the difference. They're sitting in your sukkah. They see it that it has boards. So according to the Ritva, he can't learn this way because he's following the original decree. That's a little different than the way Rashi learned. His original decree was that the issue is other people. If it's other people, then it's not going to make a difference if you took off the roof and put it back down without nailing it. That's not going to make any change in the fact what other people are going to know, because they're coming to sit in your sukkah. They won't know the difference what you did, how you built this, and that the fact that you took it apart and put it back down. They're not going to know the difference. But if it's about you, then it actually works. So this is sort of like a little understanding of Rashi's pathway, how he took this route throughout the Gemara. It actually fits with the way he originated the decree, the original decree that he explained the way, and that's how he concludes the Gemara. It actually flows very well according to him. In other words, this is the flow. The whole decree was all about himself, and then if you show that if he shows that he doesn't have a problem, then we're going to permit it. The Ritva, who learned that it was about other people making a mistake, according to that, you can't really learn this way. And that's why he actually learns it's talking about smaller boards. So the boards themselves are not necessarily a problem. It's only because initially they were made into a house. And if you take them off and put them back down, then it should be permissible because the boards themselves are not of a size that are problematic. It's only about they were made into, what is the guy who comes doesn't know that they were initially made into a house in the first place. So he's not going to have any problem coming and sitting and seeing kosher boards as your schach. So again, that's they go. It's in the yeshivas, they call this lishi tasai. Each commentary is going according to his original understanding, and how it flows later is based on his original understanding. Like you see it repeat itself, the way they understood it initially and the way they come to the solution of it. It flows according to their original understanding. Okay, so now we're up to the new Mishnah, and we're on page Tesvav, on page 15a, and the Mishnah that we're learning here on page 15a, it's the new Mishnah, about 7 or 8 lines up from the bottom of the page, and we're going to start with the we're going to start now with the new Mishnah. Hamakara sukasei b'shpudin. If a person roofs his sukkah with spits, a spit is something that they use like to rotisserie chicken or something. You would stick something on a spit and then roast it. So what happens if you use these spits for your sukkah? And either you use these spits for your sukkah, or the Mishnah says, "Oy ba'aruchais hamita," you use the long board that holds your bed together. That board that's on the side, the long board. See, there's the long board and the short board. The long board is the board that goes along the length of your body. The short board would be that goes along the width of your body. So the long board of your bed, let's say you stuck those on top of your sukkah. Now, what's the problem with these items? So you're using a spit as your schach, or you're using a board from your bed as schach, and the Mishnah tells us that there is a way that it'll be permissible, but it sounds like it really is not permissible, but you have a way to make it permissible. And the Mishnah says, if there's enough space in between them that's similar to the amount of space that they take up. So, for example, if your if the spits are taking up 10 feet of space on your as the roof, and you have similar amount of empty space, 10 feet of empty space, so then you could just fill up the empty space with kosher schach, and you will make it kosher. So what the Mishnah is really saying is that these things are not going to be kosher for schach, but you're because you're going to fill up the empty space, which is equal to the amount of space of these non-kosher schach, and you're going to fill it up with kosher schach, it'll be kosher. You'll kosher your sukkah. You'll have a kosher sukkah. So the spit is going to be a non-kosher sukkah, and the problem with the spits is that we're dealing with wooden spits, so think that they would be kosher, but the problem is that they are considered a vessel. They're makabel tuma. They are considered a vessel, and the problem is that it doesn't have a receptacle.
Right.
So how is it invalid for schach? A vessel that has a receptacle is invalid for schach. So these spits are made out of wood. Again, if they were made out of metal, then for sure you have a problem because they don't grow from the ground. But if they're made out of wood, they do grow from the ground. And the fact that they are not a receptacle should be that they're kosher for schach. They should be kosher. So what would make them non-kosher? Yes, David.
And there's a note here in my Gemara. It says,
"You're cheating. I'm trying to get people who are thinking."
Sorry. I'll wait.
So,
and I don't know, Rabbi, isn't it implied a skewer? Isn't it implied a skewer is metal? Isn't that? I mean, you can't cook with wood because the wood will just burn on the fire. I mean, it'll just burn up, and then your chicken's gonna flop down.
So the thing I remember is when in camp, when we used to roast marshmallows, we would use a stick. It was wood, and sometimes it would start on fire, but not always, because it's a little further away from the flame. But even if it starts on fire.
Listen, a chicken takes a lot longer than a marshmallow. By the time that chicken's gonna, the skewer's never gonna survive enough time for the chicken to spin around.
the thing that I'm guessing is that maybe they would, if they use chickens, they would fill up the entire spit with chickens so that it would never have a location where it could start on fire. That's my guess. The other option is maybe it would start on fire and they would wave it, shake it out a little, or blow it out, or or let it burn a little. Also, it's okay. It's okay if some of it burns. But the thing is that there, it could be a spit that's made out of wood. Rashi seems to learn this way and mention this pshat in other locations. But anyway, so the problem is, so how is it that it's going to be, how is it something that's problem? So what's the problem? You got wood, it comes from the ground, and it's not a receptacle. So why is it a problem? Yes, Jeffrey.
It's a like you said, it's a minimal kind of space that you're going to cover with it. But well, we're talking about two different things. My wife says you should remind everybody that if you're cooking something with a branch, it has to be green branch, and then it won't catch on fire. That might not be the case here, because it seems to assume that these have been used before rather than that they're new ones. It seems to imply that they've been used before, just like the board from the side of the bed. So maybe because of the balance that you're only using a very small number of these things that are very thin, or maybe it's something you just cut now and you would normally use it for a spit, but that you're using it for the alternative method, and that's also maybe related, that you change the usage.
So in other words, so why is it a problem then? In other words, why is it receptacle for tuma? Why is it a problem?
Well, like you said, it doesn't receive anything.
Right. So it's a problem. So why is it a problem? Use it for stock. Let's use it. Let's say it's kosher.
Yeah.
So okay, we're gonna let
There's got to be another reasoning then.
Yeah.
I'm not thinking of.
All right, David. What's the note you wanted to read, David?
Okay, it says according to Rob. Yeah.
Okay, well, Rambam holds that it's metal, so that's not an issue.
Right.
I want to know the other opinion.
Yeah.
But we're learning Rashi's thought that it's wood.
Okay, so some explain that these are wooden spits and they're capable of makabel tuma in certain circumstances, and others explain that they're wooden skewers, but they're makabel tuma because they have metal tips.
The metal tip.
Yeah.
So that's the answer. There's a metal tip that causes the wood to be makabel tuma. It's a small metal tip, but it's nevertheless, it makes it a receptacle. It makes it considered a receptacle because the metal part of it doesn't have to be a receptacle. The metal part, even if it's flat, it's makabel tuma. Wood, again, the laws of tuma, of impurity, are complicated. But on a very simple level, certain items are receptacles for tuma, for impurity, and those are anything that's a receptacle for tuma, for impurity, is invalid for schach. You can't use it for schach. So, like, for example, all the wood that we use for schach, the branches, mats, and all these types of bamboo and whatever we use for schach, it's all unfinished products. Once it's a finished product, it could be a problem if it's a receptacle. It could be a vessel, could be considered a vessel if it's a receptacle. So, for example, if you have, I don't know, if you have if you have wood that's made into a receptacle, I can't.
What if you had wooden salad bowls? You want to use them for stock. You're going to put these wooden salad bowls on
top. It's solid wood, and they're from China, and they say no additives. It's just wood, right? Yeah. And no glue and nothing added, and and it's just wood. And so why can't you use these wooden salad bowls for schach? And the answer is because wood is, although it grows from the ground, you trust the Chinese that it's real wood, It grows from the ground, but the problem would be that it is a receptacle, and it's a makabel tuma. It's considered because it's a vessel. It's considered susceptible to be makabel tuma, to receive impurity, and something like that is considered like it's not eligible for schach.
Rabbi?
Now metal doesn't have that rule. Metal is, even if it's flat and it's not a receptacle, it also will be susceptible to impurity. Wood has a special law that in order for it to be susceptible to impurity, it needs to be a receptacle.
Rabbi?
So a flat piece of wood, it would not receive tuma. Metal, on the other hand, if it's flat, it still would receive impurity. Therefore, if these spits have a little metal at the end, they will now be susceptible to impurity, and therefore you can't use that entire piece for schach. And the only way to do it, as our Mishnah says, is if you have equal amount of empty space. And if you have equal amount of empty space, then it will be a way to make your sukkah kosher by filling that empty space with kosher schach. And we'll have to see in the Gemara how that works. You know, how does that make your sukkah kosher? You have a lot of non-kosher stock there also, but the point of the Mishnah is that it will work. Yes, Moshe.
What about coconuts? Is that makabel tuma?
So that's a different problem. The fact that it's a food. Food is susceptible to impurity.
But the shell, but the shell itself, the exoskeleton of the, if you want to call it that, of the external part of the food.
Yeah, but again, the laws of impurity are a little complex. But if I remember correctly, the outer part is also considered like a yad, a handle to it, so it also could be susceptible to impurity, if I'm not mistaken. So although it grows from the ground, but I don't think you would be able to use it for schach. I would have to look it up for sure, just because it's complicated laws with regard to tumah. What's considered a yad, what's considered the handle is also like susceptible to tumah, and or the shomer for the pri is considered. So if I'm not mistaken, that's those are susceptible to impurity and would not be valid for schach. Okay, so. So let's continue in the Mishnah. So the Mishnah gave us two examples. Again, we've learned Rashi, that we've learned this the pshat that the spits are made out of wood, but we did hear from David that there is another pshat that it could be that the Rambam understands that they're actually metal spits, as Victor was convinced that they have to be metal. So that fits with that's the way the Rambam does learn. And the other thing was that we mentioned was these aruchai samita, which is these boards that are basically used for a bed. And you've separated, the bed is obviously not intact anymore. You're just using the boards. And they are going to be also considered a problem because they, although they grow from the ground, it's wood, but the boards are also going to be a problem that they're somehow susceptible to impurity, which is really and the next question of why is that? Why would the boards be susceptible to impurity if they're also flat boards? The boards of the bed, why should they be susceptible to impurity? Again, why is that a problem? If you look at the Mishnah basically implies that these are all problematic, and the only reason it's going to be permissible is because you have revach beinehen kamoisan. You have space between them that's equal to the amount of non-kosher schach. Because you have empty space besides for these boards, that's why your sukkah is going to be kosher, which, it's implying pretty clearly that the boards are not kosher for schach, but because you have space in between them that's equal to these the amount of non-kosher schach equal to the boards, that empty space is going to be your ray of light that's going to kasher your sukkah. That's going to be your permit, is because you have empty space equal to them. So the actual boards are not kosher for schach. Why not? They're board. They're wood. So what is the problem with these boards? So the simple understanding over here is that even though it's not a vessel, it's not a receptacle, but there are special laws with regard to items that are sat upon, or that are lied upon with regard to tumah. And again, people shut their ears when they start hearing the word impurity. It's people get bored. It's like it's not the most exciting part of the Gemara, the laws of purity and impurity. But there is a law that when it comes to sitting on certain things or lying on certain things, it's called tumas medras, the impurity of pressure of stepping on. Daras is like to step on it, to put weight on. So when a person who's tame with certain types of impurity, like for example, a woman who gave birth, a zava, a nida, matzaira. These are people who have these matzaira, someone who has leprosy, someone who has a zav, a person who has an emission that's considered zav, 3 emissions in a row that are some type of like a gonorrhea type of a sickness. But if he has it 3 times in a row and he would need 7 days of purification, of not seeing any of that emission, and that's called zav. He's impure. He can't go to the Beis Hamikdash, and so not every type of impurity does this law apply to. That you can't, if you lie on something, that item becomes the equal to you. You're an av hatuma. You're the source of tuma. The item that you lie on or sit upon, that also becomes equal to you. That's a very unique type of impurity, and it only applies to. If I'm not mistaken, 4 types of tuma, 4 cases: zav, zava, and a yoledes. And if I'm not mistaken, is it also matzaira? I think it's a matzaira as well. Anyway, we'll come to it. Well, when we but anyway, so here what we're dealing with is that this bed, although it's not a receptacle, but it has a different type of susceptibility to tumah, and that is the tumah of lying upon or sitting upon, being that it's a bed. So even though it's flat, it is susceptible to tumah. Okay, so that's the laws of the Mishnah that have to do with why these items are invalid for schach. Now the Mishnah continues and says, and this is a very I would say this next line is a Mishnah, is really something that we've talked about at length. Hachotet begadish, a person who digs in the piles of hay or straw, and he digs in them and makes a sukkah. Lasis loy sukkah, to make a sukkah. Ain't a sukkah. It is not a sukkah. And I hope we all know the reason for that. And the reason is that it's called taseh. You have to make a sukkah. You can't just make space and have a sukkah naturally built there originally, retroactively. You have to build a sukkah. And what that means is you have to make the schach on a sukkah. You can't have schach there originally and build the sukkah under it. You can't have kosher schach. Let's say you knew how to put schach, a mat of schach, a kosher mat, and you knew how to keep it in midair. And you it's somehow in midair, and you say, you know what? Oh, look, there's the schach there already. Let me just build walls around it, and I'm all set. That would not be kosher, because you have to build a sukkah. Building a sukkah means you got to put the schach on for the purpose of shade. You have to build it as a sukkah. You can't have a sukkah that's there, that's built already. You got to make the sukkah. And making the sukkah means making the shade, got to put the schach on. Here, what do you have? You have a whole big bundles of this straw. And what you're going to do is, what you want to do is dig out a sukkah under it. But did you put the hay on the top as schach and for the purpose of shade? No, it's there from part of the bundles. And all you're doing is building basically a space to dwell in, but you're not making the schach, you're not making the roof as a kosher sukkah. So this is called, this is not kosher. And the term that the Gemara is going to use is called taseh v'lo min ha'asu. You have to make it, and it can't be made retroactively. It has to be made as a sukkah. So that's the Mishnah. This is the Mishnah, and it basically gives us
Rabbi, would that mean if you built your walls and then some tree decided the branches all of a sudden it was windy, the branches all broke off and they landed on top of your walls, and now you look up and say, "Wow, my sukkah's ready to go. I didn't, all I did was put the walls up." You'd have a problem, right?
I think so. I'm going to have to look it up in Shulchan Aruch because in your scenario, it was built. It sounds right. It sounds like you're right. It sounds like it's not kosher. I just want to double check. It's an interesting case. Thank you for bringing that up. I don't want to say that it's 100% kosher. I just want to double check, but it sounds like what you're saying would fall into this category of that it has to be made, and it's not if it's kosher, retroactively. So I think you're right. But if I don't remind me tomorrow if I don't tell you if it's either way. I'm gonna just double check in Shulchan Aruch. So anyway, the Mishnah basically told us two main points, and that is that you could have non-kosher schach, but equal space to it, and then it would be a kosher sukkah. And the other thing that the Mishnah told us was that you can't have a taseh v'lo min ha'asu sukkah. You can't have a sukkah that's built in a way that was not made as a sukkah, and you sort of like just dig out space under it, and it's sort of like or retroactively a sukkah. You have to make the sukkah, which means put the schach on top to make it as a sukkah. The Gemara now says that on the first part of the Mishnah, we mentioned about having half and half kosher schach and half non-kosher schach. So the Gemara says, Lema tevi tiyufta, let's say that this proves wrong an opinion regarding the laws of an Eruvin of a Mechitza. The Rav Huna berei the Rav Yoshua, the opinion of Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yoshua, let's say that this proves him wrong. This Mishnah seems to prove him wrong. The Itmar, because it was said in the tractate Eruvin, the Amoraim, the rabbis of the Talmud, discuss this, where Rav Papa talks about this, and Rav Huna, berei de Rav Yoshua talk about this. What do they talk about? Parutz ka'oimed. If you have the exact amount of parutz, empty, a breach that's equal to the amount that's oimed, that's there standing, and you're making a wall in order to make a reshus hayachid, in order to make a private domain. It's regarding the laws of Shabbos, of course. In Eruv for Shabbos, you want to build some type of a mechitza, fence, and you have these boards that are, let's say, or poles that are 3 handbreadths, and in between every pole that's 3 handbreadths width. Of course, it's 10 handbreadths tall, but they're 3 handbreadths width. So in between each of them, you have space that's equal, which is exactly 3 handbreadths in between every 3 handbreadth pole. And what happens in that scenario is you can't rely on the law of lavud. Lavud is a special law that everything is as if it's filled in. And that's if it's less than 3 handbreadths. But if it's exactly 3 handbreadths, you just missed it. You missed the boat. The 3 handbreadth rule is up to 3 handbreadths. Once it's 3 handbreadths, it loses that option called lavud, that you're allowed to consider everything attached. And so what happens here is you have a lot of poles for your mechitza, for your fenced-in area, and you also have equal to that empty space. And each empty space is considered real empty space because we don't have the law of Lavud to have a halachic wall to make it all attached and make it all like one. And so now you have equal space, empty space, and walls. You have exactly equal. And so imagine you have it around your house. Just think about your courtyard. You put imagine you have boards, you have poles, the fences, that the fence is not attached, they're not attached to each other. You just put in poles that are beams that are 3 handbreadth wide, and in between every beam you have an empty space of 3 handbreadths. So you have exactly empty space equal to the amount of solid wall. And so the discussion there is exactly this case. Parutz ko'imed, you have a breach the same amount as solid wall. Rav Papa Amar Mutter. Rav Papa says that's kosher, that's mutter, that's permissible, and it's considered like a wall. It's considered like a reshus hayachid. It turns into a private domain. Rav Huna Bereid Rav Yeshua Amar Aser. Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yeshua, says that will be prohibited because we can't call that a wall because it has so much empty space. It's equal empty space, and you would not be allowed to carry in it. Our Mishnah seems to say that if you have empty space, the exact amount as your kosher schach, as you have empty space which you're going to use for kosher schach, exactly the amount of the non-kosher schach, so that will permit your sukkah. And it sounds like the exact amount is good enough. If it's equal, it's good. So so the Gemara says, Amar Lach, Rav Huna Braid Rav Yeshua. So Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yeshua, can tell you back, my kamaisan, what does it mean it's equal? It doesn't mean so specific. It doesn't mean so precise. It really means benichnas v'yotzei, that you have a little leeway. You have to put it in and to take it out. It's not so exact that you would have the precise amount of exactly how much. You give yourself a little extra to fit it in and to take it out. And so ultimately what ends up happening is you have when you fill it with schach, with kosher schach, it comes out that there's more kosher schach than non-kosher schach. That would be the understanding of the way Rav Huna Bereid Rav Yeshua will explain it. So the Gemara seems to imply, like according to Rav Papa, yeah, that would be fine. But according to Rav Huna Bereid Rav Yeshua, you would have to like fill it up. It means that there's enough space to fit it in, that there's be a little extra area. And because you're trying to fit it in, and ultimately you end up with more kosher schach than non-kosher. Not much more. It's just a little drop more. It's just enough to fit it in. And there's a movable area. It's not stuck in that you just fit it. And because of that, it ends up that there's a little extra. Now, the Gemara understands that the reason why we're explaining it that way, even though maybe it's not the simple reading of the Mishnah, the simple reading of the Mishnah was that it's kemoisam, it's exact, but the Gemara answered that it wasn't exact. Now, why is the Gemara answering that it's not exact if the simple meaning is that it's exact? So the understanding the Gemara has, you know why we're translating it that way? Probably because you never could really be so precise. And so the Gemara is saying, since you can't be so precise, it must be talking about that there's a little extra space, and therefore we're going to translate the Mishnah that it can't mean kemoisan exactly the same amount. Can you be so precise and say it's exact? This is the exact amount. When you measure something, are you really that? Is it to the millimeter, to the, are you able to do, if you can you really be so precise? It's impossible. So because of that, at least the way the Gemara thinks is that's probably why we're translating it this way. That it means k'maisan b'nichnas v'yoytze. It's almost the same amount, but we're going to give a little leeway. Nichnas v'yoytze, enough to get the schach in, the schach out. It's you can't just expect us to be so exact. So that's why the Gemara is very comfortable answering that it must be nichnas v'yotze. Why is it comfortable to answer that way, even though it doesn't fit the Mishnah so perfectly? The Mishnah used the word k'maisan. So the Gemara thinks that probably we're translating it this way because it's impossible to be precise. And the Gemara now asks and says, you can be precise. V'ha efshar l'tzamtzem. We can be precise. And because of that, if the Mishnah says k'maisan, it means it literally exact. And we do, in other words, the Gemara's understanding that a person has the ability to be very precise. I don't know how they, maybe in today's day and age, there are ways of being very precise, maybe with computers and
Rabbi, I'm a retired engineer, and every engineering drawing says plus and minus. Now, maybe it's plus and minus an inch, maybe it's 100th of an inch plus and minus, but when you make a drawing and they give a dimension, like they make your computer, they say, okay, your computer is 16 inches plus and minus 100th of an inch, right? So that because there's no way to make anything without some kind of tolerance. And that's right. True with every I used to work on missiles, but in any case, there's a tolerance that goes with every dimension. So it can be tight, it can be loose, whatever, but there's usually a tolerance.
These are materials that shift, because the kosher schach is the movable, very flimsy stuff, as opposed to the shibudim. So
right.
The slight bit of wind or whatever, shake the whole sukkah, a little bit.
Not only that, I would ask a question on this: the fact that anything that's this raw material, as sukkah moves on, it does slowly shrivel. Anything that I mean, although bamboo maybe not. I don't know. Maybe bamboo doesn't really. But generally, schach does get smaller. The branches. Why? I don't know why. Why is that bamboo doesn't get smaller? Is there it's just a different nature?
Yeah, it's much more solid, and also, I mean, even though the wood is not filled,
it's already dried out.
Yeah,
dried out already.
Very strong. It's very strong. That's why they use it for salad bowls.
What, they use bamboo for salad bowls? Yeah. Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Those are the latest thing.
Oh, I didn't know
When
that.
we traveled last to Eretz Yisrael, we found a lot of
So basically that answers my question here. That efshar l'tzamtzem is the Gemara is saying that you could use schach that's dried out already, and once it's already dried out, there's no more that it could dry out, and it won't get smaller. So it could be precise. Now, Victor, I can't answer you. You have a good question, and the Gemara does talk about. There are other Gemaras. I remember a Gemara in Nedarim also, and talks about efshar l'tzamtzem. It seems like a machlokes, an argument. Can we say that people are able to be metzamtzem and say it's exact? And the Gemaras deal with cases where if what is it, like an animal gives birth to twins, and is it possible that they both came out exactly at the same time, or is it like things like, there are Gemaras that talk about the efshar l'tzamtzem or efshar l'tzamtzem. But it seems that what our Gemara is asking is that there are such opinions, that there is such a view, there is such an option of efshar l'tzamtzem. How do we, and according to that, how do you understand the Mishnah? The Mishnah says that it's k'maisan, and maybe there's a way to learn it that way, that it does mean exact. And would that be a proof against, if you learn it that way, would that be a proof against Rav Huna Bereid to Rav Yehoshua? And the Gemara answers two answers. The Gemara's answer is, Amar Rav Ami. Rav Ami says that we are talking about b'madif. What does it mean, b'madif? It means that although you could translate it exact, and the reason why we're going to translate it not that way is not because it's impossible to be precise, but because that's really what the Mishnah means. It means kamaisan, not so exact. It means you're adding, you're letting a little extra more than the actual space of the non-kosher stach, and your madif means it's going over, meaning the schach, the kosher schach, is going to go over a little of the spits. It's gonna be a little extra, and what we translated when we translated the on page 15a on the bottom, the last two words nichnas v'yotze, what we translated those words to mean that there's a little extra space. We didn't mean that because it's impossible to be precise. We meant that because that's the meaning of the Mishnah. So the Gemara initially thought, oh, you're saying that because it's impossible to be precise, but there are views that there is such a concept of being precise. We do accept such an option of being precise. And the Gemara answers, no, we didn't say that because of that problem. We're saying that because that's the meaning of the Mishnah, that we're talking that you have a little extra space there, and your madif, it's talking about that it's not so it's not exactly the same. There's a little extra, and therefore you do have more kosher schach than non-kosher schach. And the Gemara then says, and Rava also has an explanation here that it afilu tema b'she'ein madif. Rava says you could even say that we're talking about that it's not extra space. That means that there's exactly the same amount of space that's being used for the non-kosher schach as the kosher schach, but nevertheless, what you're doing is you're putting it the opposite direction, and you end up with more kosher schach than non-kosher schach, and it'll be mevatel. It'll nullify the non-kosher schach. So Rava says afilu tema b'she'ein ma'adif. You could even say that it's talking about it's not so much. It's not extra space. You don't have extra space of the kosher area over the non-kosher area. No, it's exactly the same. Im hayu nesunim shasi, if the non-kosher schach is placed in one direction, noisnon erev. So you put the kosher schach in the opposite direction, perpendicular. So it's not parallel, it's perpendicular. And what ends up happening then is you're basically putting more kosher schach on than the area that's empty. So in Noisnon Shesi, if you put the Erev, if the non-kosher schach, which are like the spits or the boards of the bed, if they're placed Erev, which would be like along the width, which is one direction, show Noisnon Shesi, you would put the kosher schach along the length, along the Shesi, along the opposite side, along the opposite direction, perpendicular, and this way you will have a kosher sukkah. So what the Gemara is basically concluding is that we can't prove anything with regard to the laws of Shabbos, and Rav Huna Bereid Rav Yehoshua holds that parutz ka'emed is aser, that if you have exactly equal, it would be aser. This is not proving either way. It's not proving that it's more. It's not proving that it's equal, and you wouldn't have any proof to the laws of Shabbos. When you learn the laws of Shabbos, you'll have to deal with it then. It's an argument between Rav Papa and Rav Huna Bereid Rav Yehoshua. But here we're talking about a sukkah, and the schach is either exactly equal or it's a little more, and you either have it going in the empty space, and there's maybe a little extra empty space, or you have it going along the opposite direction, perpendicular, and is basically more kosher schach than the non-kosher schach, and it becomes batel. And so that's the way the Gemara answers this problem from the laws of Shabbos. Yes, Jeffrey.
I'm wondering, well, how would we envision this? That it seems like they first talked about having the spits together, one after the other, and then the space, and it says kimoson. But what if you did the following? What if you had your flimsy reeds and branches,
Kosher schach.
and you intersperse the spits to hold them down because it's going to be breezy. And the other things could fly off. The spits are heavy. What if you interwove them? And of course, it's the comparison of these words, erev and shasi, that's from weaving. And in weaving, they have crossovers between all of the different components. And it's not just in one place. So I'm wondering, maybe they also are saying, if you made it like weaving, and you put the spits and without putting them all together in one place, and you put the flimsy regular kosher schach in between, and the spits are heavier, so they hold them down, that maybe they're also lost in the larger amount of the kosher schach, and without being all together in one place. And then you might not have the problem, I don't know, they don't talk about that, of sitting underneath the wrong place.
In other words, what you want to do here is you want to say that it's more mixed together than the way the simple understanding is that one is just going one direction, one's going the other direction. You want to mix it more together. The benefit that you have by doing that is that you're sort of making it like nullified almost more. That sounds like what you're trying to get at. Is that what you mean? Because the more it's mixed, the more like, it should be nullified to the kosher schach, because it's because you're mixing them together, and they're not as visible, even though they are somewhat visible, but it's more mixed.
And they're drawing the analogy with weaving. Those are the specific words.
Yeah, the only thing is it doesn't necessarily mean weaving. Shesi means one direction, Erev means the other. Now, in weaving, you do like connect them, but it doesn't necessarily mean that way. The Gemara does often talk about a Shesi and the Erev, and it doesn't necessarily refer to the actual, it's just the direction of which the warp and the woof, whatever,
Exactly. Yeah.
But it's not necessarily while it's being woven. There's a warp, even, and there's the direction of that thread is the warp threads. The other direction.
In English, though, we know the words. The woof is what's there to begin with. When you laid out the threads, the warp goes in and out. Because that's what's thrown. The words are very clear. The woof is related to the word weave, and the warp, the word Boston in Yiddish, it's exactly the same. Exactly the same word.
Right.
That's what you take with the shuttle, and you put in and out, in and out, in and out.
Right. So this is the thing. We did have before in the Gemara the word bishachavtan. I don't know if you remember that, bishachavtan, where you mix them together. And our Gemara, the Gemara is we're going to be dealing with issues like that soon as well in the Gemara. So let's wait for the discussion about that, where you have, because what we're dealing with also is this concept of having equal schach, and not, with kosher schach and non-kosher schach, and how much shade is really coming from the kosher schach, and do you need majority shade on the bottom or kosher shade? So these are issues that we'll be dealing with, and let's put it off for there, and then maybe we'll look back at this Shesi and Erev and see if your pshat will benefit us or not. But at this point, we're gonna just learn it simply, and everyone have a wonderful day. We're gonna conclude here.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Yes.
In my Gemara, there's no diagrams. Do you have diagrams in your Gemara or in the art scroll?
I do have an advanced Gemara over here that does have some diagrams, but they're very unclear, and it doesn't really they don't really explain themselves. But if you want, tomorrow I'll show them whatever it has here, and I could explain them, I guess. But I mean, I think it's it's pretty much understandable that either there's, for example, I just give you an example. One way of learning this Gemara is that you have, let's say you have 4 handbreadths of empty space in between every 3.9 handbreadths of spits. So you have 3.9 handbreadths of spits, then a 4 handbreadth of empty space, 3.9, handbreadths of spit, four handbreadths of empty space. That would be madif. There's extra. There's more space for you to get for you to put the kosher stach in and out. It ends up that there's more kosher stach. And the other way is just perpendicular, and it's one is going one direction, one's going the other direction. So I think it's understandable. But if you want, maybe tomorrow I'll try to figure out how to share screen. If I hold it up, I guess maybe I could. See, you have it easier. You have a Gemara on your computer, so when you share screen, it works out. I don't think it'll work. I mean, I could try it. I have a, So,
You have to get rid of your background. Otherwise, if you don't get rid of your background, it won't show.
We're so sophisticated, we can't hold it up and look.